Greetings, Dragon Riders, and welcome back to Powerful Nothing. Today, we're going to be going over how to build a dragon's deck. Thank you, darling. What are you doing? Let's begin at the start with what actually is a dragon's deck. Well, a dragon's deck is a deck that's looking to win by putting a large amount of dragons onto the board and turning them sideways. Early game is looking to ramp and keep drawing cards. Is looking to play some effects that reward us for playing dragons or make dragons better in some way. They could be making them bigger, it could be giving them a bonus keyword like haste or double strike, or importantly, it could be making them cheaper to cast. In the mid-game, we'll start putting some dragons into play to try and build us a board state. We'll use protection to help keep our dragons around, and importantly, we'll continue to keep ramping. We can also play some cards here to help cheat dragons into play. This is so that when we reach the late game, we are getting to a point where we can put multiple dragons into play in a turn. When we're putting multiple dragons into play, there'll be so much power on the board that our opponents will not be able to stop us. So that's what a dragon's deck is, but it's also worth clarifying here what a dragon's deck is not. Just because your commander is a dragon does not mean that you are building a dragon's deck. Think about how you're planning on winning the game. If you're suiting up a commander with equipment and going for a 21-point commander damage win, that is not a dragon deck, it is a Voltron deck. If you're using an ability of a dragon to make some kind of value engine that doesn't revolve around dragons, these are also not dragon decks. They just happen to have a dragon leading them. Like Tevil is mostly a Graveyard Matters deck. Korvold is mostly an Aristocrat deck. Arcades is normally a Walls deck. They don't care about dragons, so they are not dragons decks. Let's talk about colours next. Just being blunt here, to me a dragon's deck has to have red in it. It has the most dragons and Dragon Matters card of any colour. It has decent ways of cheating dragons into play. It has some of the best dragon-based win cons, as well as just being a solid colour for ramp, card draw and interaction. It is possible to build a dragon's deck and not include red, but at that point you are making things overly difficult for yourself. This may change over time as they print more cards, but for the foreseeable future, and especially if you're just starting off, please include red. At a minimum, it is the only colour that lets you easily do a mono-coloured dragon's deck, as we know them built today. The next best colour for a dragon's deck is green. It has some of the best payoffs for having big creatures, especially when it comes to drawing cards. And importantly, it gives you access to the best ramp in Magic. It has great ways of cheating things into play, as well as some really nice ways of protecting our board state. Moving on to white, white also has some great board-based protection, as well as having the best cheat removal in the game. On its own though, white is a little light on Dragon's Matters card, but it can be a really solid option as your second or third colour. I just let you in! Meow! When it comes to blue, blue obviously has the best card draw in Magic, and it has the best protection in the form of counterspells. It also has clone effects, which are a good way of getting extra dragons into play for cheap. It also has a lot of ways of doing more interesting out-of-the-box things with your board state, like turning everything you have in play into a dragon. Lastly, we have black. This also has good interaction, along with two of the best board wipes for the deck with Crux of Fate and Scavenger Regent. Black also has reanimation effects, which are a good way of cheating things into play. It's likely when picking the colours of your deck, you might want to combine colours to get a better result. When you combine colours, you get all the best parts of what those colours have to offer, and as an archetype, dragons really excels here, as there are so many great 2, 3 and 5 colour dragons for you to choose from. If you are going to go with multiple colours, do keep an eye on the pip density of your deck. Like, casting a card with triple red in its casting cost is much easier to cast in a mono red deck or a Gruul deck than it's going to be in a 5 colour deck. And if you're building a 3+ colour deck on a budget, I'd really recommend having a base colour or 2 and splashing the rest. Like in a 3 colour deck, picking red to be your base colour where you have most of your spells and splashing the other 2 colours will make casting all of your spells so much easier. And in a 5 colour deck, picking Gruul maybe as your base so you get good dragon cards from red and the fixing from green, I think is a great place to start. The next thing we need to do is to pick a commander to lead our deck. Now, you may already have a big tasty dragon in mind, which is completely fine, but we're going to be going over a couple of things here that we want our commanders to do. So as long as it does some of these things, then you will be golden. If it does more than one, then honestly, all the better. The first option for a dragon commander to do is to make our dragons stronger, like giving our dragons double strike or haste, or buffing up their power. In some way, we're looking to increase the damage output that our dragons do. The other thing we might want from our commander is to make it easier to put a dragon into play. This could be by reducing the cost of our dragons, like the ability on the Dragon. Or it could be cheating a permanent into play, like the other ability on the Dragon. Or our commander could help make us mana to help cast our dragons, or it could make us dragon tokens. All of those things are helping us put more dragons into play. These two things might be simple, but remember, our game plan with the dragon deck is to swing through with a horde of flying angry death. So we either want to make that angrier death stronger, or we want to have more of it. Another thing to consider with the commander is it doesn't have to actually be a dragon. Rivers of the Claw lets us cast dragons from our graveyard. Sarkhan, Soul of Flame, makes our dragons cheaper, and Kalia of the Vast lets us put a dragon into play when it attacks. They also don't even have to have specifically the word dragon on them as well. Mora from the Boundless doesn't say dragon anywhere on the card, but we can make it say dragon. Tanuk Steadfast Second also doesn't say dragon, but it still lets you cheat one of them into play. I have a Kess Dissident Mage dragon deck. It's using spells to put dragons into play for cheap, and in this build, Kess helps me cheat dragons into play by letting me recast those spells. You can definitely get creative here, but as long as it makes sense in terms of what the deck is doing, then run it. Ah, damn, this thing is warm. Oh. Right, so you've got your commander. Let's talk about the types of cards we actually want to include in the deck. Let's go back to our initial statement on what is a dragon's deck. A dragon's deck is a deck that's looking to win by putting a large amount of dragons onto the board and turn them sideways to win the game. From this, we can pull at several threads to help us to see what type of cards we are going to want to include. We know it's a creature type matters deck, meaning we'll be wanting to look for cards that care about dragons. To find these, we can go to Scryfall, we can enter our commander's colours and put the word dragon into the text box. Or, if you want to see these effects on dragons, you can add the word dragon to the type line. You can then sort by EDH rank to find the ones that are most often played in Commander. We know that dragons normally have high power and toughness, so we can look for cards that care about us having big creatures in play. Again, to find this, we can enter our commander's colour in Scryfall and search for the word power or toughness. Dragons are also, generally, pretty expensive to cast, so we know we're going to need to run a pretty hefty ramp section in order to put them into play. On top of that, we could look at running cards that cheat dragons into play, so we could search for creatures on battlefield here. And then, because we know the end goal is turning our dragon lads sideways and winning with combat damage, we can run cards that reward us for attacking, or cards that make our dragons that we are running more deadly. So here, we could search Scryfall for the word combat, or attack, or the plus symbol even. That process will help us find a bunch of cards that we want to include. The next thing we need to go over is our deck skeleton. This is a base for you to work with to make sure the deck has everything it needs to properly work in a game of Commander. It's also a great tool to help you cut that pile of 150 playables into the 60 odd cards we're actually going to be running in the deck. Let's start with our ramp, and this is going to be larger than a regular deck because we're going to have more expensive cards than a regular deck. I would generally break this down into 8 ramp spells that cost 2 or less mana, and then on top of this, add some big ramp, like ramp that late game will help us cast 2 dragons in a turn. Importantly, cost reducers do not go here. You shouldn't consider them ramp. Cost reducers for our dragons help us cast our dragons, but they won't help us cast the other cards in our deck. Ramp is there to help us cast all of our spells. Next up is card draw. This is vital for any deck. It actually lets you, play Magic. This is a section that people generally don't run enough of in Commander, and I would always recommend running between 10 and 12 bits here. What you get will be dependent on the colours that you've chosen for your deck, but nowadays each colour has ways of drawing cards. There's plenty of generic card draw, especially if you're in blue, red or black. There's also now plenty of dragons that draw cards at multiple points on the curve, so there's no excuse anymore for not running enough card draw. You can also look at cards that care about the size of creatures or creatures coming into play. When we were talking about searching for cards earlier, you could add the word draw a card to your searches and you'll get a ton of awesome options. Next up we have interaction, the biggest section by far that players don't play enough of in Commander. When we play Commander, we are not just goldfishing in a vacuum. Our opponents are trying to win as well, and we need ways of stopping them. I normally like to run 2 board wipes in every deck, and the rest made up of targeted interaction. This interaction as well, I also want to be where possible at instant speed. I also want a mix of options that hit as wide a range of threats as possible. Your opponents will play artifacts, they will play enchantments, you need ways of answering them in your deck. Next up you have a little bit of protection, and this will be color dependent. But if you can, I'd look to pack a couple of bits of protection to stop your opponent's board wipes or their own targeted removal. We're going to be putting a lot of mana into our game plan. It'll really suck if our board gets wrathed or our best creature eats a Doomblade. This does get more important if you know your playgroup is more competitive, as they'll be more likely to have answers of their own, so do keep that in mind when you are building your deck. Next up, you have effects that let you cheat dragons into play. I always like running a couple of these in any big creature deck because they're really fun. When these are combined with our ramp, it'll mean we can easily have turns later in the game where we can put multiple dragons into play in one turn. These could be effects that put something from your hand into play. It could be a tutor from your deck into play. It could be a cheap clone effect. It could be some recursion. It'll probably depend on what colors that your deck is, but I find it to be a very powerful tool to actually win the game. Talking of, let's go over our Dragon Matters cards and our Dragon win cons. This is the main event. This is where everything else has been leading towards. We will have about 20 to 24 slots here, and I know that might not sound a lot of room for our dragons, but remember, unlike other creature type Matters decks, dragons are expensive. We're not an elf deck where we can run 40 elves because they all cost 1 or 2 mana. This is a dragons deck. Most of the dragons we want to run are at least over 5 mana, and even though it's Commander, we can't run 40 5 and 6 drops in a deck. Damn straight. Personally, in my own dragons decks, I've tended to run around 18 dragons that are there to win me the game, and around 6 support cards, but you can adjust this up or down as you want. When it comes to choosing your dragons that you want to run, let's again take it back to what the deck is trying to do. We are trying to put dragons on the board and turn them sideways. A great place to start here is looking for ways to double up the damage that our dragons dish out. There's a bunch of different ways that we can do this. Some standouts for me are cards like Lathless Dragon Queen and Ultrava Hellkite, because they are a dragon board state in a can. They add more dragons to the board just by us playing our deck. So for each dragon we play, or each dragon we attack with, we get another dragon. That is effectively doubling up the amount of damage that our deck can dish out. Earlier, we mentioned Ataka World Render. If it's not in the command zone, it's still great in the deck at giving all of our dragons double strike. Again, that is doubling up the amount of damage that our dragons dish out. You also have a card like Scourge of the Throne. This can give us an extra combat damage step. Again, that's doubling up the amount of damage that our dragons can dish out in a turn. Same with Twin Flame Tyrant. This is a newer one that directly doubles the damage that our whole deck is dishing out. Terror of the Peaks is another fantastic dragon that has the ability to have it deal damage straight to an opponent whenever we put a dragon into play. You even have Dragonlord Kolaghan, which is basically the same thing. It gives all of our dragons haste, which means they deal their damage the turn they come into play. So yes, in total we will have less dragons in our deck, but these doubling effects stack so nicely together. This is the reason we've also gone pretty big on our ramp, and we have a whole section to cheat dragons into play. A great way of doubling up the amount of damage a dragon's deck is dishing out is by playing multiple dragons in a turn. Outside of these cards, there are still plenty of awesome ways and Dragons Matter cards that you can run. The ones I've mentioned are the ones I think will work in any Dragons deck, but there's some cool dragon-based combos that you can run, or cards that will be more specific to your commander. So everything is linked, the whole deck is working towards this goal. We're spending our early game ramping, drawing cards, getting through our deck. On turns 4 to 6 we start putting some dragons into play, and then either because of all the ramp or cheat effects, we'll get to a point where we can start putting 2 to 3 dragons into play in a turn. And because all these dragons synergize with each other and make each other and our board state stronger, we'll be swinging through for some serious damage very quickly. And then because we have some protection and some recursion, we can use that to rebuild or protect our dragons if any of them get answered. The last section that we need to go over is our land section. What you play will vary depending on the amount of colors that you are. If you're monocolored, you can really run more utility lands that don't generate colors of mana. Also great in these decks are lands that can produce 2 mana, so things like Ancient Tomb being great in a mono red deck, but obviously that also currently being a game changer. Cards like Command Beacon are always good with expensive commanders, like we're probably going to be running in this Dragons deck. If you're a 2-color deck, you can run a couple of utility lands, but we are starting to care more about the colors that our lands are making. There's a lot of double and triple pips in a Dragons deck. If you're 3 or more colors, I just wouldn't really bother running utility lands that don't generate colors of mana. Because the curve of our deck is already going to be quite high, we're already going to be slower than our opponents. We can't make that worse by not letting us hit our colors of mana. In terms of the makeup of colors, this is general for any deck. Count up the number of colored pips in total in the deck. Ratio them out for each color. This is what your land split should make up. So if in your 3-color deck you end up being half red spells, a quarter black and a quarter green, you don't have to be super strict, but in that scenario I would want more lands that produce red mana than the others, as I know there's going to be more red pips in the deck. You should also keep an eye when on the curve the spells you want to cast are. If all of your 1 or 2 drops are green, maybe because that's your ramp, then you want to run more green because you want to see it in the early parts of the game. On the flip side of that, if all of your black or blue pips are 5 or 6 mana, you don't need to run as many lands there because you'll know you'll have more time to go and find them in the game. This brings us nicely onto things to consider. We've talked about the curve a little bit, but in this deck I really need to stress to you all, we need to make a real effort to keep the curve down. Dragons are expensive to cast. They will be the top end of our deck. We need to try and keep every other spell as cheap and efficient as possible. And as we've gone over, that means most of our ramp being 2 or less mana. Our targeted removal can mainly be 2 or less mana. Same with our card draw where possible. And this basically goes for everything that's not a dragon. Do you want to play Magic? Then I'm sorry, you need to eat your vegetables. The next thing to consider is the power level of the deck. This is actually very related to the curve, almost like that's why I put it in this part of the video. The bracket system may well have changed if you're watching this in the future, or the cards on the Game Changers list might have been updated, so we will keep this general. The type of cards that power up a Dragons deck are cards that help us do our game plan quicker and more efficiently. The Dragons could well stay the same in any power level of deck, and yes, some Dragons are definitely stronger than others and some are weaker, but the thing that generally makes the decks more powerful is increasing the speed and the consistency. So if you're looking to make a deck more powerful, you're going to run cheaper, more efficient ramp. You're going to run more cheap, consistent card draw. You're going to run more tutors. Tutors are strong because they can be the best card for that exact moment. A tutor can be a removal spell, a tutor can be a land, a tutor can be half of a game-winning combo. That is why they are strong. Specifically for this deck, however, tutors that cheat dragons into play will be some of the strongest that we can run, as not only can they tutor up the best dragon from our deck, they also cheat on mana, and that is always a dangerous combination. On the flip side of things, if you're looking for a more casual deck, run the normal 2 and 3 drop bits of ramp. Don't worry about tutors, don't worry as much about having the most optimal cards. Run what you like or run what you have. That doesn't mean a lower power deck can ignore the things like running enough draw spells or trying to keep the curve low. Ignoring those fundamentals makes a bad deck not a lower powered deck. It just means rather than running a Rhystic Study, run a Ponder. Rather than running a Deadly Rollick, run a Doomblade. Instead of Mana Vault, run a Fire Diamond, that kind of thing. The last thing I want you all to consider is how to overlap cards. Like with any deck, try and find cards that do multiple things. Take a card like Dragon's Horde for example. This card is awesome. It is both ramp and card draw in this deck. This is especially important when it comes to our dragons. If we can find effects that we want on dragons, it makes them easier to include in the deck. Like Balefire Dragon for example. This is a dragon that's also a board wipe. Savage Ventmaw is a dragon, but it's also some big ramp. Skyline Despot is a dragon that adds the Monarch to the game, which will help us draw cards. Also, including dragons in the deck has become a lot easier over the last couple of years. There's a lot more cheap dragons now than there used to be, and we've also had dragons with omens printed on them, so we can get more cheaper dragons into the deck if the omen side has an effect that we want to run. If you follow all these tips and tricks, you'll be smashing face with a horde of angry flying death in no time. Alright, that's going to do it for today. Thank you all very much for watching. If you found this video helpful, please consider subscribing to the channel. You have been watching Powerful Nothing. We'll see you on the next one. Goodbye.